Hello, my name is Phyllis Bobrow. I want to welcome you this evening on behalf of Temple Beth Israel's Sisterhood to a presentation by Nadia Telsey of her new book, Get Empowered, a practical guide to thrive, heal, and embrace your confidence in a sexist world. Please know that we are recording this presentation so that it will be available to view and review at your leisure. It will be posted on Temple Beth Israel's YouTube channel. For those who aren't lucky enough to know her already, Nadia has been an activist and educator for decades. She pioneered the field of verbal and emotional self-defense, adding an essential dimension to the movement against gender-based violence. She co-founded a feminist martial arts center in Brooklyn, New York, now called the Center for Anti-Violence Education. And she served for many years on the Oregon Attorney General's Sexual Assault Task Force. Nadia created the Bystander Upstander program, which offers tools for safely combating hatefulness without escalating situations. I'm honored to be one of the trainers for those workshops. Recently, Nadia was recorded at the Trauma Healing Center presenting about her new book. We're going to share that video with you now, after which Nadia will be available to answer all our questions.
Phyllis, there's no sound.
And it's pretty choppy.
Without them, so it takes a community, and you know who you are, and I appreciate you to the ends of the earth. I wanted to mention that this book, which is not Get Empowered, it's Walk Out the Door by Pearl Wolf and Evelyn Anderton, and most of you probably know we lost Evelyn this fall. This is an incredible book about domestic violence. The best way to learn things, to me, is through storytelling. And it's a novel. It's extremely readable, but it's just infused with terrific material and information. So check this book out. So I want to tell you a little bit about how Get Empowered came to be. In 1988, I wrote a version when I was working at Rape Crisis Network because I needed it. And then when I started teaching at the University of Oregon, I created this version that might be familiar to some of you, though it used to be mostly white, a white cover, illustrated by a friend of mine. And the feedback I got from students was, it was always anonymous feedback, and it was extremely positive. The book made its way around, and people would ask for copies as far as from Germany, and I would run to my publisher, Kinko's, and make copies and send them out. And I always wanted to get it published, but I just don't have that personality. I'm not good at pushing myself, and that all seemed extremely intimidating. But I started to write a revision, and I spent millions of hours on it, and some of you helped critique that revision, and then I dropped it because I just couldn't do it. And then I got a letter from somebody saying, you have no idea what this book meant. And I was at the National Institutes of Health in 2011, and one of my self-defense colleagues lives near Bethesda. And so she was visiting me, and I proposed to her, she's a writer, would you work with me on this book? And it took 10 years, but she did it. She found the agent. It's her voice, my content, her voice in the book. So I feel very grateful, and I just happened to get this from a past student. Some of you know Dana, and she said, "You changed my life and helped my healing like nothing and no one ever came close to." And this is why I wanted to push the book. It's not because I was making a career as a writer. I certainly didn't need the spotlight, but I wanted this material to get out because I believe in it and so many people have believed in it. If you read the book and you like it, please, please put a review on Amazon. We have like 9 reviews now. 3 of them are relatives of Lauren, my co-author. So we could use a few other people. So please, please do that. So a little bit about what the book is. It's not a book you sit down and just read. It's a workbook. And it's got stories in it. It has exercises in it. It's meant to be a friend. So there's a coach that can follow you through the book. And there's just reminders that we're on a journey and it doesn't happen overnight. It's something that you need to keep working on. So you can just read the book and you'll get something out of it. You can pick out pieces to do, or you can just go through the whole thing. I know from my students, because they had to do the exercises, how valuable it is when you do them. So I'm just curious, this is just a personal curiosity thing. How many of you know what TLDR means? Oh, thank you. You make me feel so much better. Lauren and I argued over this. At the end of each chapter, there's a piece that says TLDR. And I went, who knows what that is? You have to explain it. She said, everybody knows what that is. It means, so now you can be hip, too long, didn't read. So it's a code word for a summary. So I just thought I'd let you know that so you can be with it. So the book is about several things. It's about gender-based violence, and that's any violence based on gender identity or sexual orientation. So that's what gender-based violence is, but it's a lot more than that. It's about how do you set boundaries. So let's see if I can find the page quick enough. Boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. That's what a boundary is. And most of us were not brought up to have boundaries or encouraged to have them. It's about harassment and gender-based violence and what it looks like, how assailants work, what the stages of assault are, what their ploys are that they use, lots of information about assault. But it's not enough to know what to do if we can't do those things, because then we just feel worse about ourselves. So it's about really training ourselves, our assertiveness muscles, our boundary setting muscles, our self-defense muscles, just the way we train everything else until it becomes muscle memory and it can just happen. It doesn't, you don't read the book and then turn around tomorrow and everything's totally different. It doesn't work that way. And even if things aren't different, the book is to assure you that nothing is your fault. So that's really important. We all do the best we can, and we really need to take that in. The book is also, I want to introduce Jocelyn Hollander, who's sitting in the corner. Could you stand up for a second, Jocelyn? Jocelyn, we are so lucky to have Jocelyn in our community. She's a researcher who has researched empowerment self-defense, which is what this does. And some of her research, and you can ask her questions later, is about what are the advantages of taking these classes and reading books like this if you're never assaulted? There's so many things you gain about changing your life that have nothing to do with assault, and it's part and parcel of the whole thing. So I have some questions to ask you, and the only rule is if you don't want to answer, you don't have to. Okay, so if you have ever been harassed on the street, raise your hand. If you have ever been expected to move out of the way when approached by a man, especially a white man, especially a straight man. If you have ever had your breasts or butt touched without permission. And just look around. If you have ever met up with someone exposing themselves, raise your hand. And just look at this. If you have ever had someone you know not listen to a no, but plead with you, try to guilt trip you, whatever. If you've ever had to avoid a relative or someone at work because of harassment. If you've ever been afraid to walk alone. And if you've ever been made responsible for somebody else's experiences. It's all your fault. So take a breath. And the most effective breaths we have are with a long exhalation. So have the exhalation be a little longer. This should make it obvious that this violence is not a matter of some strange individuals out there. It's systemic. And it exists on a spectrum from irritating to completely life-threatening. But all those things have things in common. And one of the things they have in common is they express power. And so, for example, who is allowed to touch whom tells you who has power. If there are two men and one is a boss and one is an employee, guess who's allowed to put his arm around the other one's shoulder? We see this around gender, we see this around race, we see this around any time that there's a power differential. The people with the power have the right to do the touching and often the right to take up space on the sidewalk. We certainly saw that in Jim Crow South. Very often women are expected to give way, and if you don't give way, there's a crash that often happens. And this is not to say that all the people who are doing those things are even aware of it. But it reinforces the power differential anyway, even if we're not aware of it. All these things on this spectrum, from irritating to life-threatening, maintain power. So they keep the power relationships in place. And they do that through instilling fear, through limiting us, through taking our space. And our space is taken in so many different ways. If somebody is mentally undressing you, very often what we'll do, especially when we're younger, is look down. Our space is taken. If we're afraid to go out at night, our space is drastically taken. So it enforces who gets to own the world, who gets to take up space. It also, this spectrum is designed to control our behavior. So supposedly only good girls don't get raped. So if you only dress a certain way, keep your legs together, don't take up space, nothing's going to happen to you, which of course is a complete lie. It forces LGBTQ people to behave in a certain way. And it even controls men who step out of line to call other men on their behavior, forces them into the place of what's considered okay. And I'm not going to go into intersectionality a lot now, but most of us don't have just one identity. There's many identities that we carry. It can be about race, it can be a class, it can be about disability, it can be housing status, it can be so many different things. Each of those things compounds the violence. because it makes us more vulnerable and less able to get justice. So if you have someone who is an undocumented immigrant, for example, there are a lot of people who do a lot of things to them and they have no recourse at all. So that's just one example of the many ways that intersectionality plays into this. This system is held in place by focusing on those victimized. And this is where the heartbreak really comes in. So there's a double standard, and it keeps the focus off the perpetrators. As long as we keep the focus off the perpetrators and off the culture that supports this, there will be no change. Some of the blame of victims is so subtle that we don't even think about it. So a couple of examples. If you hear that there was a rape, and at the time of the rape, the rapist was drunk, is he held more or less accountable? And if there was a rape, and the person raped was drunk at the time of the rape, are they held more or less accountable? More. And so often we'll hear about an assault. A woman was jogging on the bike path at night, or a woman was raped when she went to a guy's house and had some drinks with him, that the first thing that people say is, what was she doing there? Instead of, how dare someone disallow women's right to be in the park? How dare someone break someone's trust by inviting them over and then doing this? And as long as we do that, there'll be no change. Probably we've all participated in that because it is so built into the culture. So the more we're aware of it, the better. I want to read a little from the book just so I'm not just talking and you can get a sense of the book. Well, actually, I'm not going to do this, except to say that there is also what we call the self-defense paradox, which is people have been against women's self-defense for many reasons, but the big one is we shouldn't have to do this. Well, I couldn't agree more. But meanwhile, what are we going to do? Just wait around for the culture to change when there's little evidence that it's changing very fast? So that's a self-defense paradox. This is all under what we have created called empowerment self-defense. And these are the basics of empowerment self-defense. We always did the best we could. The perpetrator is always the one responsible. We may have done things that we regret that is different than causing the violence. The person who does it is the person responsible. No one has the right to judge what we did or did not do. They weren't there. Each of us is different. We will do different things. And this includes going along with an assault, which we call strategic compliance, because we survived that way. No one has the right to judge that. Okay, so a little bit about why I wrote the book. I wrote it for myself because I really needed this. And it was really spurred by an experience I had when I lived in New York City years ago. And I went to a store to buy a pair of jeans, and they did not have a dressing room. They just had an aisle where they stored all the extra clothes, and you were supposed to go back there. So I did. And while I was there, this employee came into the area, and he got on a ladder, but he had his back to me, and I didn't say anything. I was not very comfortable, but I thought, well, he's just doing his job, and he's got his back to me. He's not really doing anything, so I guess it's okay. But if he does something, I'm going to say something. So he got down off the ladder, and he asked me how the pants fit. He put the a tape measure that he had from around his neck, and he put it around my waist. I really didn't like this. However, don't jeans come in waist sizes? And maybe he was trying to get me a really good pair of pants. So I didn't say anything. I took that line and moved it a little further back. But if he crosses that line, I'm going to say something. Then he put the tape measure around my thigh. Well, now I was really miserable, and I was having a screaming battle inside my head. Get your mouth open. Yeah, but what if I'm wrong? And blah, blah, blah. And he'll call me a bitch and blah, 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 blah. I didn't say anything. He undid my pants. He started to put the tape measure around my naked thigh, at which point I said something outrageously assertive like, I think you better go now. And he did. And when I left that store, I was filled with so much self-hate. It never occurred to me to be angry at him because I was so angry at myself. And I felt like I was the only one in the entire world who would have been that stupid to just stand there. And when you feel that way, you don't go tell everybody. You keep silence. And silence keeps the system going. So I decided I needed to understand what happened here. And this took a while to get to this point, but I needed to understand what happened here and why was I so silent? So what were all the forces that pushed me into that place? And so that's a big part of this book, is examining what those forces are. This is a dissection of the what happened when I started to really name started to really take apart the story. So I am going to tell it again, but it's going to have more information in it. Nadia, this is in the third person. I'm going to try to stick to that. Nadia went to a thrift store to buy a pair of jeans. There was no dressing room, just an aisle in the back where boxes were stacked. While she was changing, an employee entered the area, and with his back to her, he began sorting through the boxes. Nadia was uncomfortable with feeling, but she didn't say anything because he was just doing his job, making excuses for his behavior, denial. And she didn't want to seem paranoid, worrying about what he would think of her. He then turned around and asked her how the jeans fit. She dismissed her discomfort, ignoring her feelings, and answered him. He then put a tape measure around her waist, convincing herself, talking herself out of her feelings, that he was trying to help her. After all, jeans come in waist sizes. She said nothing, but resolved to speak up if he did anything, reacting instead of acting. So I was going to act if he did this, rather than what do I want, which is acting. He then put the tape measure around her thigh. Again, she didn't say anything, telling herself he was just trying to get her the best fit. Finally, he pulled down the jeans and measured her naked thigh. At that point, she was out of excuses, and she told him to leave. She set a limit. She felt that the whole assault was her fault, self-blame, for continuing to give him the benefit of the doubt, prioritizing his feelings. She didn't tell anyone what happened for a long time because she was sure no one would be as stupid, negative self-talk, self-blame as she was. Those words, self-blame, denial, passivity, this is what I call the internal barriers, and that I really needed to look at. And so then I started to think about how do I dismantle those? Where did they come from, and how do I dismantle them? So denial. The first thing was believing in intuition, really believing in intuition. I knew from the second he set foot back there that it was not okay. Understanding ploys. I didn't know anything about ploys. There are definite ploys that assailants use, and one of the most common ones is offering help. And the second most common, or maybe the most common, is asking for help, because then we feel guilty when we don't help. And it's really hard to not go there. That's the one that Ted Bundy used, was asking for help. And finally, I didn't understand how assaults worked, because we've been told that somebody jumps out of the bushes And white people are told, right, it's a black man who jumps out of the bushes, and out of nowhere. Well, that's not how assaults work. First of all, most of them are by people we know, the vast majority. And somebody doesn't usually just assault, although sometimes that happens. They do it incrementally. He came back to the area where I was. I didn't say anything. He pushed it a little more. I still didn't say anything. At any point, if I had stopped him, he could have said, hey, I was just trying to get you a good pair of pants. I was just trying to be helpful. What's the problem with you? And we are trained to be so afraid of somebody saying that to us that it has an immense amount of power. And I know I'm not talking to everybody, but if you can relate to my story at all, nod your head or put your hand up or whatever. So, I mean, I have found out that I'm not alone. This is how the system is designed. So I needed to learn to change passivity. I needed to flip the script. I was so worried about what he would think of me. It never occurred to me to ask myself, what do I think of him? What do I think of a man who comes back where a woman is changing and does this? And often we're so caught up with what will they do to me that we can't get to what will I do. So we need to flip the script. I needed to speak up. I hadn't a clue how to speak up. Nobody had ever taught me assertiveness. And so there's a whole portion in the book, and I'll get to it a little later, about assertiveness, and lots of places to practice in the book. There are examples of situations, and you get to write in what an assertive response might be, exercising your muscles. And throughout the book, there are a couple of little designs. One of them is a flame, because every small thing that we do, even if it's just noticing that we didn't do something, is a little flame that we want to grow. And we also have a little picture of a coach, because often we need an external voice telling us, you have a right to speak up. This was great what you did, because we get so many messages that aren't that. So that's built into the book. It's meant to be a friend. So we have denial, passivity, self-blame. And the way you counter that is to hold the perpetrators accountable and allow yourself to be angry. And anger is not allowed to women. And then if you add other identities to that, like black women and angry black women, oh no, there are so many pressures against doing that. And finally, low self-worth. So I do want to read a little from the book. It'll just take me a minute to find the page. To be able to defend, stick up for, and advocate for ourselves, it's important to believe it's okay to claim my power. It's okay to believe in and trust myself, even when I have doubts. It's okay to put myself first. And I love that one of the characteristics of a good woman is selfless. Selfless. I can allow myself the same empathy, compassion, and grace that I give others. My life and safety are precious. I deserve to be safe. I am valuable, and I am worth defending. So those are some pieces of changing what I call the internal barriers. So assertiveness. And some of you probably are pretty familiar with assertiveness, but I know that a lot of people aren't. And a lot of people, some people have always had trouble with assertiveness. Some people have had trouble with assertiveness because they go to aggression immediately. They're both problematic. So assertiveness is saying what you feel, need, or want directly, clearly, and respectfully, without hinting, apologizing, expecting someone to read your mind, or being passive-aggressive. Being assertive also means no name calling, no put downs, no cursing. By being assertive, we take responsibility for our own feelings and don't guess someone else's motives. Assertive means respecting our own rights and the rights of the other person. How this would have helped me in my story is I was worried about blaming him for something that he might not be doing. I didn't have to go there. I could just start with, hey, you know something? I need you to wait until I'm done. Or I'm not comfortable with you back here. I need you to wait. I don't want you to touch me. Those are all assertive comments. And I'm not guessing his motives. Now, when you're clear about a motive, of course you can speak it. And you can always intensify assertiveness as you need to. There's a page in here about healing. See if I can find it. I put all these stickies on here, but there's so many that doesn't help. So this one says, rarely, if ever, are any of us healed in isolation. Healing is an act of communion. And when we're told to be ashamed, when we're told to keep silent, it's very hard to get there. And especially when people, well-meaning people, the first thing they say is, why did you, why didn't you? What happened for me is I was in a consciousness raising group. And probably some of you are old enough to remember that. And for those of you who aren't, we had groups where women would gather and talk about our experiences as we unpeeled patriarchy and understood sexism. And I debated, do I tell my group about what happened? Because what if I told that story and my group said, how could you just stand there? It was terrifying. But I decided they're not gonna say it to my face. They'll say it later. They'll be nice to my face. So I told the group, and they started sharing stories. We all started sharing stories. And eventually what happened was several friends of mine went with me to the store to have a confrontation. And we walked in, and the manager, I assume, was there, and the employee. And they picked up our energy really quickly and said, oh, the store's closed. And we said, no, it's not. It says right here on the sign, you're open till whatever time it is. Meanwhile, I had walked out of there with a pair of pants I hated, just to get out of there. And my friends were there to confront and also to make sure I got a pair of pants that I liked. So I was in the dressing room changing in the back area by myself, changing, and they got into it with this guy. And they did not use assertiveness, they used aggression. So one of my friends realized that he spoke Hebrew and she cussed him out in Hebrew. Called him a pig, and he punched her in the nose, broke her glasses, and bloodied her nose.
Oh my goodness.
She wore it as a badge of honor. She felt like in standing up for me, she stood up for herself. She was really proud. And we said to the manager, what are you going to do about this? And he said, well, as far as I can see, you came in and started it. So we said, fine, we'll be back with a picket line. And he was fired.
Oh.
So this doesn't always happen. It was a really wonderful thing that it happened, but you don't always get that. But I was lucky that I had my tribe behind me, and that's what happened. So, I was going to show you this, but I don't know if I can find it quick enough. You can be a good person with a kind heart and still say no. No is a word that has been forbidden to many of us. And many of us have learned to say it, but it didn't come easily. I know women in my classes, yelling was one of the hardest things they did. The word no was a difficult word. So I'm going to say some things, and I just want you to answer with no. And you might want to add some words to it, And sometimes that's appropriate and sometimes it's not. But for now, just an unadorned no. Okay? Can I use your phone? No. Let me give you a ride. No. Will you give me a ride? No. Now, you're saying it, but it's not completely convincing. It's not no. It's no. And it's in your body, it's in your eyes, it's in your whole being. No. Will you give me your phone number?
No.
Yeah. Will you watch my child?
No.
Have a drink.
No.
Oh, come on.
No.
Just one drink.
No.
You need to loosen up.
No.
Good. And so at that point, you need to escalate it. No, I said no. I've said no and made it clear. Why are you having trouble listening to my boundary? Put it back on them. What's your problem here? So, we also use no's in self-defense when we're feeling threatened. And it could be the word no, it could be the word back off, it could be the word get back. Get back! Now I have a very funny story to tell about this, which is that I used to go to martial arts conferences. And this woman was testing for her black belt. And this guy was supposed to come out and attack her and take her to the ground or whatever you're supposed to do. And he comes out and she says, back off! And he turned around and he said, Sensei, what am I supposed to do? And that ended it. So that was pretty great. So another thing about no is every no is a yes to something else. Every no is a yes to something else. So I want to end by asking you with the same fervor and the same energy to yell yes to these statements. We deserve to have our boundaries respected.
Yes.
We have a right to speak up for what we need.
Yes.
We have a right to take up space in the world.
Yes.
We deserve to live free from the reality and threat of violence.
Yes.
We have a right to fully be ourselves.
Yes.
So thank you very much. And I would be happy to take questions, and probably Jocelyn would too, if you want to know about any of the research that's been done that backs up the work that we've created. Ginny.
Going back when you said be assertive and not aggressive, and you said, and not passive aggressive. And I'm in a situation now of being accused by two people of being passive aggressive. And I looked up and I don't get it. So how can you be passive aggressive in a situation like that?
In this situation?
Yeah, or, when you said,
Right.
and that includes passive aggression.
I'm not sure in my store story what passive aggression might have looked like, but if anybody has an idea, because I'm not thinking fast enough. Usually it means when we're not, I tend to be very indirect sometimes. It drives my partner completely crazy. But in these kind of situations, less likely to be that way. And that's a way of being that is cultural and has to do with women a lot. And we're expecting someone to guess what we think. If we're uncomfortable being outright assertive, we often will try to get there another way. And this is not necessarily what you're talking about, but I know in many situations where someone has somebody, maybe it's a stranger in this case, asking inappropriate questions or trying to engage you in conversation you don't want, what somebody does is they move away. right? Which is an indirect way of saying I don't want to talk to you. Or I'm really busy right now. Well, they don't want to get it, and they're not gonna get it. And so all of those indirect ways of speaking get us in trouble. And if you say things like, well, I really can't talk to you right now, I have to get to blah, blah, blah. Oh, that's all right, I'll give you a ride. So it can get us in trouble. So that's not passive aggression, that's just kind of being evasive. It's not aggression. Aggression, the passive aggression is when you always tend to be late for something and you sabotage somebody and you kind of keep forgetting things that mess them up, and so it's not direct, but it's aggression. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I have a question. You know, you talked about the number one thing, you know, to kind of combating that it is really paying attention or noticing your intuition. And I wonder if you could just talk about that a little bit. Because I've noticed for myself when I found myself in situations, you know, almost always there's that like clear understanding, that like real intuitive sense. And I wonder if I could hear from you or, you know, either one of you, like dissect that a little bit. Like,
Well, I can tell you a little bit more about intuition, which is that not always, but very often it's based on something our unconscious mind is picking up. It's just picking it up so much faster than our conscious mind did it. And so I have a story that I have often told. It comes from a self-defense book. And it's about a woman who was home alone with her small child, and very, very late at night or early in the morning, the doorbell rang. She lived on a cul-de-sac, so a dead-end cul-de-sac. The doorbell rang, a woman said, I hope you can help me. I was visiting a friend and my car broke down. Can I come in and use your phone? This was pre-cell phone. She had a really weird feeling. Here's a woman, alone, stuck, you know, and she said no. And, you know, had to deal with the feelings that came up. Well, the rational, anyone know what the rationality was behind her feeling? Where did she live?
cul-de-sac.
On a cul-de-sac. If this woman at the door were on her way home from her friend's house, what was she doing on a dead-end street? So there was something rational behind it. We don't always get to know what those things are, but we just, you know, and they're not always there, but they're often there. It's just something that our subconscious picked up. I don't know if that helps, but anything else you want to say about intuition?
Nadia, can I add a little something to that?
Yeah.
I think it's related to your gut.
Yes.
We're always talking about our gut feeling. You know, the brain and the gut are connected, so I think a lot of our intuition comes from that.
And we often feel it as a body sensation.
Yeah.
People feel it in different ways, but we often feel it in our bodies. Other questions? Yeah.
How did that story turn out in cul-de-sacs?
The cul-de-sac, she called the police. The police came and said it's a good thing she didn't let the woman in because the woman had a bunch of male cohorts with her, and they would have pushed their way into the house, robbed her, and assaulted her. So, yeah, it was amazing. Not easy to do.
Could you talk more about breathing?
About breathing?
Yeah, you've mentioned it and it's in the book, I know.
Yeah. So some of you probably know this or have heard this, that the out breath is really important for calming. So the in breath, it's part of the nervous system, is like the in breath is, it's not that it always sounds that way, but that's fight and flight. You can't think well when you're in fight and flight because your amygdala is taking over to try to preserve you. The out breath is rest and digest, they call it. That gets you back to your thinking brain. So when you're upset, taking a breath and letting that out breath be longer, this doesn't happen naturally at all. And so we have constant reminders in the book, and I try to remember, not always successfully, to build it into my day, that whenever something's happening, so it becomes a habit. Because when you're under stress, it's really hard. But if it becomes more habitual, so that's the out-breath, why it's so important. Yeah.
What did you mean by every no also has a yes?
So when we say no to somebody, we're saying, yes, I have the right to decide for myself. I have the right to set a boundary. I have the right to do what I want. I don't want your drink. I don't want whatever it is. I mean, anything. It could be just so many different things. It's a yes to ourselves, basically. Any other questions?
Nadia, there are a lot of people in this room who probably work in the area of trauma, and you have, I know, most of your life done this work. And I'm wondering if you can say what your best tool is to do this work for a long time and not get re-traumatized by telling us these stories. Yeah, just one is fine. Any secret that you have that you want to share with us, I know would be really appreciated. And you wrote a book about it to boot.
Well, I think for me, I mean, there were times I had students also do journals that I just cried. I mean, I can feel the tears now. And one male friend of my partner's was unlucky enough to be in the house when I was reading these journals. And I was not very pleasant to him. I mean, it really wasn't fair, but I was absorbing so much pain, and I was so angry. But I think what sustained me is seeing the changes in people and having them share with me what it's meant to them. And I have had so much of that, which is why I want to put the book out in the world. That sustained me. That kept me going. And around this, I also want to say, and this is empowerment, self-defense. When people think of self-defense, people often say to me, what style do you do? You know, because they're thinking martial arts. It is so far from martial arts-based self-defense. And a lot of those classes are fear-based. A lot of them are focused only on stranger assault, which is the very small number of assaults. And they are focused on what do you do at the moment when somebody is actually like grabbing you. So they've missed a whole bunch of other stuff. But in addition to that, empowerment self-defense is about teaching people what this is all about. It's about building community. So in my classes, we had small groups, and we really encouraged, the whole first class practically was taken up with get-to-know-you games because it was important to me to build community. And there is nothing forced in these classes. If you don't want to do an exercise, you don't do the exercise. You have the power to decide for yourself whether you want to step out or not. And so that also helps with trauma, and it helps, I think it helped everybody in the class. Anything you want to add, Jocelyn?
Would you like me to just say a little bit about the research?
Sure.
Yeah.
You want to come up here? Come on up.
She could
Here.
sit up. Also on the step. Oh, Nadia.
You get the throne. Take it.
Sit it. Sit it. I don't know if any of you have tried to say no to Nadia, but it doesn't work very well. I'll just say a couple words.
Okay.
I think the thing that's most important to know is that it's how groundbreaking this work that Nadia has done really is. It is a whole new way of thinking about how to prevent violence. And on top of that, it is enormously effective. I've done some research, and some other folks have done some research on empowerment self-defense. And what they found is that in all these studies, women who have taken an empowerment self-defense class are about 50% less likely to experience violence in the year following. And that's huge. In studies of different violence prevention interventions, researchers are usually happy if they get like a 5% difference or 6 or 8 single digits. 50% is unbelievable. And it is consistent over many studies, so it really works. And I think the reason it works is because of what all the things Nadia's been saying. It's not just about like what do you do in the moment when somebody's trying to hurt you, but all the things before that. And it changes people's understanding of themselves and the way they interact and their understanding of the world. And those things are deep. And they really are effective. And I actually brought a couple quotes from your former students, if I may read those. Sure. So one person said to me, as part of my research, I've done a lot of interviews. One person said to me, self-defense is transformational, and I can't even write down all the places in my life that it's changed for the better. So not just about violence, but about everything in her life.
So it's a little hard to hear you with the
Oh, I'm sorry. I want to keep it on for Nadia, but I'll try and talk more slowly.
That's all right, I'll just move a little further away. Go ahead, take it off.
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm 6 feet and more.
Okay, so somebody said that self-defense is transformational, it's life-changing. And it also lasts a long time. Nadia and I, before the pandemic, we were starting a project looking at the long-term consequences of self-defense. Is this easier to hear, by the way? Yeah. And that project got derailed by the pandemic, but I'm gonna finish it because what they were saying was so important, and I want to read a couple of things to you. And I don't know that Nadia has actually heard these quotes, so this may be the first time. One person said to me, I've periodically wanted to send Nadia a thank you card. There have been experiences in my life where I've wanted to write to her and say, you made this change for me. Thank you so much. It's because of your class that I'm in this wonderful, healthy marriage. Or because of you, I was able to do this thing that I was so scared to do. I wish everyone could take this class. It's so profound. And people talked about leaving abusive relationships and starting new careers and traveling alone and starting to be leaders and advocating for other people in their communities or just living their lives more freely. And Nadia has helped literally thousands of people change their lives and live in a new way. Not just the people you taught directly and also the people that you've inspired to go out and teach. And I know there are people in this room who are some of those folks. So the research really supports the effectiveness of this, and it really is completely effective and life-changing. So thank you, Nadia, for letting me say a couple things, and for your work, and for being my collaborator.
Jocelyn's research has given us so much credibility when there was so much doubt about what we were doing. You're only going to make things worse. It's going to make women violent. It's going to get them hurt. Blah, 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 blah. But, without the research, you don't have anything. And so this work has now taken off. It's international. It's very, very exciting to see. And I don't want to end with men, so hopefully there'll be a couple more comments after that, but we can't leave men out of this equation here. We know that boys and LGBTQ, trans men, trans women are assaulted. We also know that nothing is going to change if men don't take part, take a lead. Just the same with racism. If it isn't white people doing something about it, nothing's going to change. And if we don't have men stepping up and doing something, and unfortunately, there are very few. There's a wonderful man from Eugene, Jack Straighton, who lives in Portland, who has been stalwart as an anti-rape activist working with men. And there is a film out by Jackson Katz, who's been another longtime person, and it's really worth getting and showing it to everybody you can think of, especially men and boys. And it's called The Bystander Moment, Transforming Rape Culture at Its Roots. And it's saying to men, you need to step up, and we understand the pressures because now they're beta men, right? Any man who stands up against rape isn't a real man, and this whole movement now for alpha men that's coming out of the MAGA world. But I know that a lot of people speak to their daughters when they are launched into the world. We need everyone to be speaking up to their straight cis sons, saying you need to step up when you hear stuff. And some of you heard this the last time I spoke, but there are these people from my high school, we started, there was more happening on Facebook as we had a 50th reunion. And so one of them, I don't know why I get his posts. I don't only check Facebook when I get something in my email saying somebody posted. Inevitably, he has posted Redhead of the Day with some buxom young woman, at which point the other men chime in and rate her. I'd give her a 10. Are you kidding? Blah, 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 blah. These are 75-year-old men. And I was really upset about it, and I thought about writing, which would get me nowhere. But what really upset me, where are the other men? Not one of them has spoken up. And that's what's really heartbreaking to me. So, anyway, any last questions or comments? Yeah.
Do you have any suggestions for people who might want to get together and do small groups with your book?
I would say just gather some friends together. And Beth over here knows we had a whole curriculum that went with it and a leader guide. And so it went through the old book. It went through this version in 7 weeks with exercises and stuff. I just sent that leader guide to Lauren, my co-author, because she thinks maybe down the road there'll be something that goes with the new book. But, just gather friends, pick out some exercises, see which ones mean something to people, and start sharing. Start breaking the silence and start, yeah. Anything else?
Nadia, what you said about how men have to be involved makes me think about the connection to the abortion issue, because men need to be stepping up for that as well.
For which issue?
Abortion.
Oh yeah, yeah. All these
It's always
issues.
the woman's
Yeah,
fault.
yeah. It's not my. There were men at the university who would say, "Do I need to come to this thing on rape? It doesn't have anything to do with me." Like it would just happen by itself. Anything else?
Yeah, I wanted to say that, my husband, when he was coming of age, his dad was a really amazing model and role model for him, but also a guide. And literally taught him, like, these are the ways that you treat women. These are the ways that you treat and behave around your mother, around your sister, around women, around your wife, around girlfriends. And so he was raised actually having a very strict guide around how men should behave around women.
Right.
And he's now a leader in the Mankind Project. He's actually an international leader in that project. And so knowing him and knowing the way that he guides other men is really heartening to
That's
me.
wonderful.
And creates safe space for me and my daughter, who, that is his stepchild, right? And to segue into the second thing I wanted to say, which is, mothers, sisters, do this with your daughters. Do this with your nieces and do this with family members and friends. I actually did a lot of self-defense work with my daughter, who is now 20. She's now traveling around the world. And I feel comfortable and safe knowing that I feel comfortable knowing that she will be safe, because I know that she has the tool and to really assert herself in a good and positive way, because I've seen it firsthand, right? In those sorts of exercises.
That's so great.
It's also our responsibility as mothers and as sisters and wives to teach the younger generation these ways, so that we are protecting ourselves, and also so that we can walk strongly in the world, strongly and confidently.
Right. And so much of this, when I was not when I was growing up, much later than that, there's been so much excuses made for young boys starting out on that spectrum. So I don't know how many of you knew Flip Up Friday, this is when girls wore skirts a lot, and the boys would flip up the skirts on Friday, and some girls didn't want to wear skirts on Friday, talk about space being taken up. And when you brought this up, people would go, "Oh, for Pete's sakes, it's just boys will be boys, it's not a big thing." And this is the culture. And so every time, like what you're saying, Talisha, teaching over and over and over again, those jerks from my high school what messages did they get telling them that this is how you're a man? It's pathetic. It's really pathetic. Any other questions? Thank you all so much. And if you want a book signed, I'll be back there.
All right, Nadia, take over.
Well, I, uh, I guess basically I just want to know what questions people have. Either about just what the book is like or about the content that I shared or more examples from the book, just whatever you might want to know.
I'd like some more examples from the book, if you wouldn't mind.
About anything in particular or about, well, I can just tell you a little bit more about the book. And
Great.
it may take me a minute to find pages that are going to make sense. But at the beginning of each chapter, there is a grounding exercise. And they're all different. I just picked up the first one that I got to. And it says this particular one was grounding and centering the connection places. Pause for a minute. No matter what position you're in, feel where your body meets the world around it. It could be your feet or back on the floor, your butt on the chair, or anything else. Take a minute to feel each connection place. Now feel where your body touches your body, such as your hands on your thighs or your lips touching each other. Feel the texture, the temperature, the energy where they meet. Each chapter has something completely different. Some of these may be familiar to people, the different kinds of grounding exercises. It's meant to take some space before you dive into this material that can be difficult. And know that you're there for yourself. At the end of each chapter, there's something called TLDR, which you all know about now, which I still don't like. But it is a summary. It's a summary of the chapter. And then there's a piece that says the heart of the matter. What's the best or most important thing you'll remember from this chapter? What's your favorite way to sum it up? Draw, doodle, tell a friend, record it on your phone, use a journal, anything that works for you. So this is not a workbook where you have to write. This is a workbook that you use however it works for you. And for some people, you go through it chronologically. For other people, you look for chapters that speak to you and what you need on that particular day. So you can bounce all over the place with this book. And then at the end of the heart of the matter, at the end of each chapter, self-care break. Take a deep breath. What self-care will you do now that you've finished this chapter? It can be a small thing, like a few seconds of stretching, or something bigger, like a day off. For more ideas, check in with the plan you made on page blah, 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 and the ideas we list on page 10. Time to be kind. Be easy on yourself. You're unlearning old ways of learning, of being. Along the way, you'll make mistakes. That's okay. Mistakes are part of learning. Take a few deep breaths and congratulate yourself for what you've done, no matter how tiny or imperfect it may feel. And that's going back to the fan the flames exercise. We are very good at noticing all the things we don't do or that we don't do right. And part of that's negativity bias, which is part of surviving, because it's safer to notice the tiger coming at us than something that's positive at the moment. However, we need to learn to look at the positive piece, and maybe you totally blew a situation, but you noticed that you blew the situation. That's a step. And that's a step that you fan the flames of. Maybe you got one word out right and then you took it away the next sentence, but you got that word out. And so that's another way that you fan the flames. And this whole book is about being kind to yourself and having a lot of compassion, because we have so many forces that have pushed us into so much shame and so much self-blame and so much self-hate. And it takes work to work our way out of that. And it never ends, but the journey is definitely worth it.
Nadia, I wonder if it really struck me what you said about the role that men need to have in this work. And I wonder if you just throw out some thoughts about how you mentioned a fellow that is doing a lot of good work with that. Maybe we bring that person to Temple Beth Israel or something. But any other thoughts that just have been in your mind? You know, I wish that there'd be something like this, or who would do such and such? Just your kind of thoughts.
There were men back in the 70s and 80s who wrote some books. One was Helping Teens Stop Violence. There were a few other ones, but how many decades have gone by? Why aren't the shelves flooded with books? And I'm sure I don't know all of them, but why aren't there many, many more books and workbooks talking to boys and talking to men? And they're just not there. Jackson Katz, who did The Bystander Moment, and absolutely bring that film. Absolutely, absolutely. But he's the same guy I knew from whenever ago. I mean, are there 4 men in the world doing this work? And I know that that's not true. It's also interesting. They showed that Bystander Moment in Eugene. What's the group that shows films? Oh God, I just lost it. They do them once a month.
The Circle and Circle Manor?
In Circle Films. And Ellen was there that night, and they showed the film, which I thought was fabulous. And then this is so like racism. This one guy says, well, I think this is great, and there are all these men who really need this. Not me. All these men who need this. Well, I knew a little bit about this guy, and if anybody needed it, he was the one. But it needed and the other men spoke up and kind of didn't let him get away with it. And it needed to be other men speaking up, because the women, we just get discounted. They will listen, men will listen to other men.
Okay. And I'll follow up on just some of this that you've talked about, and we'll see where we can go with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in terms of other things that men can do, I think giving them the language very early, and this dovetails with all this other work. It dovetails with bystander, upstander intervention, and how hard that is. And that when you break with a group, and if you break with a relative, they tell a terrible joke. I'm not going to pretend this is easy. I think it's horrifically hard. And men get judged by other men, and they want the approval of other men. The whole culture is set up for that. And now the culture is set up to have beta men. The alpha men are the real guys, and all these wussy men. That's the reaction to these men who are coming to grips with their feelings and with what's missing and with understanding women more. And there's a tremendous backlash on them. So they need to be able to support each other on this. I'm watching an ant crawl up my screen. Sorry, Aunt, you had to go. I don't know if other people have things they want to chime in about this, especially people who have sons, but feel free.
There was something that was going through my mind as I was listening to the presentation as it relates to boys and men, which is that one thing I've experienced a lot in my work life and in academic life is how women's ideas and voices are silenced. And often, you know, I'd be in for example, a work meeting with other, you know, men and women, and men tend to discount women's ideas or talk over them or change the subject or kind of gang up or take and adopt the idea and take the credit for it. And to sort of extrapolate some of the points in your book, I think it's really important, and maybe you have ideas about this, of how women can support each other in those situations to, you know, show that we're also a tribe, that the women's tribe is standing up for each, that we stand up for each other.
There is a good piece in the book about Michelle Obama, and women were getting so disgusted when that happened that they made a pact that when a woman said something and it was disregarded, the next woman would go, as so and so said, as so and so said, and they would just keep piling on so that they could not erase what the woman said.
Yes.
That's just a great example of it. Yeah. It really does help when we can do some of this together. And I know it's easy to say, oh, just find some friends and do it. You know, you could put a sign up somewhere and say, anybody want to have a women's group that deals with these issues? That's what the old consciousness raising groups started as. I know of people who are doing this with family members. I mean, they have a lot of the same experiences in the family, and there might be exercises they decide not to do, but then there's some that they definitely want to do together. So that's another option that you have. And there may be in the future a course like we used to have, but I don't think in the past we had a leader leading the course. I'm not sure we would do it that way. I think it would be more peer led chance to go through these exercises. So the best way, if you see the book, pick it up and just look at what do the exercises look like in here. Because a lot of them, you would never think of them as a self-defense exercise, although some of them are, but it's, of course, I can't think of them right away. Well, there's one about self-hate. And so you fill in the blank. As a fat person, I've been told, ... As a disabled person, I've been told. As a working class person, I've been told. Whatever identity, and then you can fill them in. And then you turn those around and you claim the strengths that go with those identities, because they all have strengths. And so that's just an example of an exercise that you can do. And that's probably a really good exercise to share with somebody else and claim those pieces.
There's people with their hands up.
Thank you, because I'm oblivious.
Well, hi Nadia, it's Julie.
Hi.
Thank you so much for doing this all these years and for getting this book done. Because it just makes it so much easier for people to access all that what you worked for all these years. I remember watching you do those self-defense classes at U of O, and how talented you were at sort of setting up the scenarios that students would be in and out of. I'm wondering if over the years you've seen any change in young women in their sense of entitlement, empowerment, or are things not so different?
So is Jocelyn here tonight by any chance? She
Mm-mm.
can speak to this best. In general, there have not been many changes. There are some surface changes. There are some role models that women now have where we had none. But when it comes down to those internal battles, when we want approval and when we're being judged and when we're told to be polite, and we're being afraid of being called a bitch, hasn't changed much. And I know that many years ago, some older women I knew were just appalled. They just totally assumed that the stuff that they had gone through when they were young was not happening now. And I don't know if anybody here has anything to add into this. Anybody?
Well, we have a new Women's and Gender Studies Gender Collective Club, is the Gender Collective. And I just think this would be just such a fabulous thing for them to take up. And you really think it can be done without you leading it? You know, without
I
a
do.
leader who can
I mean, we do have this kind of syllabus that we put together. But I think somebody could take a week and look at this and go, wow, this spoke to me. I'd like to suggest that this is the exercise we do this week.
Mhm.
I mean, I really think that that would work. I would love to hear about it. I'm curious, but I think that that would work. Especially if people talk for a while about what are you hoping to get from this. So another thing that Jocelyn talks about, and she just wrote a recent paper about it, is the non-self-defense part of self-defense, which was, we have always been saying this is so much more than an assault, because there are ways that it impacts us every day. And it's not just about assaults, it's about the bigger picture in life. And so she started doing research with past students, and she said, what's the most important thing you walked out of the class with? And it wasn't, I feel like I could kick somebody's butt, or I feel, it was none of those things. It all had to do with the way they saw themselves in the world. And so she wrote this paper about like the hidden aspects of self-defense, all the rest of it.
Mhm.
Lisa has her hand up, so if,
Why can't I see hands up? But I can't. But anyway,
I don't
Lisa.
know, there's a little message, but Lisa, I saw that she's got her hand up, so.
Okay.
Thanks, Judy. Nadia, thank you so much. And I appreciate the kernel that's come up tonight about talking to boys.
Mhm.
And I have 3 sons, and I saw words from mine being devalued and minimized by their peers and other men in their lives at that time. But I wanted to relate a story that happened just last week during the ice storm. I was out on the street and talking to some neighbors, and there's a guy down the block who we were talking, and he has this amazingly interesting young son who's in middle school now, and he's gorgeous. And I said something to the dad about like, oh, he's looking so handsome and gorgeous. You better watch out for him. Make sure to, I don't remember how he says, watch out for him and the girls. He says, and I said, talk to him. And he says, I don't have any girls. And I said, you have a son, and he really needs to, be ready for how to, anyway. And it was interesting to see the dad's look on his face, like that sort of thing doesn't apply to me because I don't have a daughter. So I plan to go talk to him again, but I appreciate some resources tonight about things I can learn and perhaps gather to prepare myself for talking to this dad about why he needs to step up and be a dad who trains his son. So I appreciate that. And Judy, if you figure out more resources that we can learn on that, I look forward to that. Thanks, Nadia, for that.
I know there's some out there, and Jack Straighton lives in Portland now. And, when I asked him recently, he mostly had the old stuff. The old stuff was great. It was great.
Thank you.
I can't tell if their hands up.
I'm just gonna start talking.
Oh, Elaine has
So
a.
go ahead,
okay,
Wendy. Go ahead,
Bart, yeah.
Wendy.
I'm
Hi,
Wendy.
Wendy.
So I know many of you, and Nadia, I think I had your self-defense from the inside out in the late 80s or 90s. And just the other day, I was talking to someone, and even though the word empowerment fits everything, the direction I've gone is more certainly empowered, but the other component is called embodiment. And I felt that the way you described self-defense from the inside out is about embodiment. And it really, probably unconsciously started, a little seed growing inside. I feel like that was the most brilliant approach. And now I feel like the research or how you've described it shows that it's not about what do I do in the moment of the assault, but how am I in my life? Like, how do I navigate? And you just, kind of confirmed how I've felt and what I've read is like, not a whole lot has changed. I wish you didn't have to write this book, and I wish it didn't have to be 10 years from now. But the reality is things take huge amounts of time. But each of these steps is about empowering and from the inside out. And I feel like when I started, self-defense was too physical for me.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think I could do that. So I didn't. But from the inside out, we all have an inside. So we're all there somehow, even if it's hate or whatever. My light just went off on a timer, but it still speaks to me, and it's still brilliant. And I'm glad you have a new book, and listening to people talk about how can we move this forward, the support. I feel like the way, if you start your class with building community in that class, and I teach and I try to do that as well, it feels like an old style, but it's kind of the thing that connects people. And if we don't have that support, we can't do it on our own. We can't. We all know that. But how do we connect? And there's a million ways of connecting, but that level of support is so important.
Yep, I could not agree more. Trying to do this alone, when we're trying to change a society, we don't change it as individuals. We change it as groups that grow to other groups, that grow to other groups, that speak out in different ways. That's the piece that we can do to change and to demand that we're treated differently. I think about what things have changed and what things haven't changed. How often are we allowed to say no without somebody going, well, what do you mean no? Well, why won't you do this? Well, what's wrong with you that you're saying no? What is your problem that you're saying no? Instead of respecting, I said no. And that is something that you would not find the other way. And it just does become embodied. It becomes that we start to really believe it deeply that we have the right to say no. And also it helps to learn that that they're going to have a parting shot like, boy, are you a bitch, or, it helps to know those things, and then they don't get to us the same way, and we can be one step ahead. But yeah, I think I'm all over the map with what you said, but embodiment, and I know this does get back to the physical self-defense a little bit, but watching women yell no for the first time
It's
is,
inside.
and it's hard for some women. It is it's excruciatingly and it hard. It takes weeks and weeks and weeks, but getting to the point of yelling no with the support of the group, feeling that no in your body. It's not just your voice, it's in your body. That's really embodied self-defense.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy.
I get it's Judy. I was struck by Julie's question about if Nadia doesn't lead it, can it happen? Actually, I was part of a consciousness raising group about 50 years ago, and it was life changing. And we, there were just a bunch of gals. We didn't have a leader. We just heard that you could do this. So we did. So I really think young people can do that because, we were less educated in the idea that, actually we could say no, or we could speak up for ourselves. There was less support for that kind of idea 50 years ago, for sure. So if we did it then, young people can do it now. Absolutely.
My memories, we had all kinds of topics, menstruation one week. And he came out with what kinds of stories and what kinds of embarrassment and what kinds of shame people had and how they learned about it and what did that mean to them. And, the topics could be so many different things, but what it does is it unpeels the patriarchy and all the ways that we have been diminished and put down. Yeah. One of the exercises I love in the book it came from somebody else, and she said, I want you to imagine that there are no men for the next 10 minutes. Now, no men have been hurt in this experiment, and they will all be allowed to come back at the end of it. But for 10 minutes or an hour, how would your life be different if there were no men? And people started just listing all kinds of things. The number one thing is I would take a walk, or I would take a walk at night. But so many things, then you start to realize that you don't do because of the potential, because of fear, or because of backlash, so, I mean, that's an example that you could do in a group like that, for example. And there's just stuff like that all over the book. Yeah, go for it.
I think Elaine had a question.
Elaine Elaine had her hand up.
Go for it.
I've been 14 places since you were talking, and I had my hand up first. So let me see if I can sort of peel back a little bit. I was thinking about the work that you were talking about with men and boys. And one of the things that I think has been really hard for us to face, and hard for us to, and I'm thinking as women as well as adults, thinking about boys, is the brutal upbringing that many of our boys and men have gone through, and just how significant and how harsh that training ground has been. And so I think one of the ways in that I've seen in some of the communities that I'm part of is not justifying sexism or male domination, but acknowledging the hurts and the harm, and finding a place for men often to work with each other around cleaning some of that up so that they can think better about how to take different actions in the world, in their relationships, etc. So that was one thought that came to my mind. And I know that there are still organizations in Eugene where men are getting together and trying to raise each other's consciousness. There was a men's center, and some of that work has gone off site from that, and some people are still trying to meet around that. And I'll see if I can find out a little bit more about that. Um, what was the other thing? Anyway, I was thinking about you approaching your neighbor or the person down the street about their son, and I think men can often relate to questions about how they were taught to be a man. You know, some of the work in that Teens Helping Teens Stop Violence really looked at what happens to boys who step outside and give them a place to sort of work through that and back each other up to sort of do something different. So I'm just bringing that up because I think there is work still happening, and it's some of it is underground. There's a lot of framing around toxic masculinity is the other thing that I hear people trying to think through. And I think it's really all about this harshness and these expectations of maleness and their role in the world. So that was one thought. And then I'll just share, Nadia, the workshop that I got to be at when you were teaching teachers how to do that activity where people where women were saying no very loudly. What I remember is that some women, it did take a while for people to do it. They were in tears, they were laughing, they were humiliated. They had a lot of feelings come up. And I haven't heard you talk about this practice. I haven't heard you use the word healing. And I'm wondering sort of how you think about that as part of this work. If you do think about
Healing
it. Yes,
or
healing.
yelling and healing? Just healing.
No, this whole work of sort of reclaiming ourselves and that emotional expression and all of the feelings that come up as people are working through these activities. I think of those experiences. I just wonder how you frame this work as part of a healing process,
Oh my
working.
gosh. It's so part of a healing process. And in fact, it's interesting because Lauren and I came to this from slightly different places. And by the way, before we end, there's a podcast that Lauren was on recently, and I think it would be great for people to hear her. She's wonderful. It gives you another view of the person I wrote this with and where she's coming from. But she would often ask me when we were first dealing with a publisher, what are the three main things about this book? And I was kept going and healing and healing and healing. It was not going to be left out of there. And yet, if I didn't keep bringing it up, it wasn't necessarily the first thing on their minds. And to me, we have been so damaged by this violence, and that damage lasts for decades. It lasts our whole lives. We desperately need healing from that. We need exercises that tell us over and over and over and over and over again how it wasn't our fault, how the perpetrators are the ones responsible, why we were led to believe that it was our fault, what were the factors that made me be so passive in my situation, that made me deny what was going on, that made me hate myself so much. All of that is healing, looking into family dynamics to help you deal with healing. And a lot of the comments, if you go on Amazon, we have more and more comments up, and there's some other comments elsewhere on the site about just uh, I think it's not publishers' comments or editorial comments or something. People talking about how healing was the critical part, and it was the missing piece to everything that they had learned. People said, I went to so many therapists for so long, this was the piece that was missing. So I don't know if that answers you, Elaine. And I do want to get back to the men thing because vulnerability is a big issue for men because of the society. In the book, there's an exercise, it's a flower, and you write in the flower, if you're female identified, what are the traits that you learned? What does it mean to be a woman or a girl? You write all those words. And then you write what are you called when you don't abide by those? What happens? You know, you're called a bitch, a ball buster, a blah 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 blah. And then I love the image of a flower breaking through concrete. And so a woman, it's a nice image of a flower, but if you have cut flowers, they're lovely for a while and then they die. So I wanted to put roots on these flowers, roots that would bust through the concrete. And what are other ways that women can be that keep us flourishing? And there was in the early Helping Teens Stop Violence, or one of those books, there was a man box. And we kind of reworked it at one point as a cactus because it was all bristly on the outside, but we knew really soft on the inside. And the same questions. What does it mean to be a man? How do you have to behave? What are you called if you break out of those roles? And they're devastating. It is absolutely hideous and devastating. And then and being able to create a cactus that can flourish by having all the different parts of what it means to be a man in a much bigger sense, embracing feminine side. But one reason that that video, now the bystander, whatever it is, moment is so important is because there's such a huge backlash as men are claiming their vulnerability, are claiming different sides of themselves, are allowing themselves their full humanity, are not feeling like they have to be these jerks that go around with their AK-47s and raiding women's boobs and all the rest of what they were taught it meant to be a man. And we are at a very pivotal moment right now because there's a lot of threat, and LGBTQ and trans movements fall right into this, why they're so threatening. And so it is very, very difficult. And, other than to say, we all need bravery right now. We all need bravery to break through this stuff.
Can I say something also?
Yeah.
What came to me right then was we need bravery, and one of the things I really appreciate so much that you talked about, and that's apparently in the book, which I haven't totally read yet, has to do with the self-acceptance and the kindness toward oneself. So I find for myself that I know maybe I should say something. We had a situation here at the farm where a neighbor wore a really offensive t-shirt. I didn't really know what it meant, but anyway, I could tell, I tell the whole, I'm not gonna tell the whole story, but just, I haven't followed that all the way through yet. And so when you were saying, think of the step that you did do, it really meant something to me because I thought I did notice it. I have thought about what I could do. I haven't done everything I could do yet, but think about the things you did do. And so part of being brave might be, okay, I think I'm actually okay. So it's not just being brave is one thing, but if I don't feel like I'm okay, I'm probably not going to have I'm not going to get this to the step of bravery. So I really appreciate what you're saying and what you've done in the book to help us as females move past some of that self-hate, or the things that you were saying, the internal barriers.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I'm pushing 70 and I'm still working with it.
And if all you do is berate yourself for why didn't you say something and blah, 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 that just does nothing. That just keeps us completely stuck. One more thing I want to say, you don't always get to do this, but like with my store story, I got to go back sometimes especially with people you have time to think about it. And then you take the initiative when they're off guard and say, I'd like to have a conversation with you. There's something you said the other day, and I was caught off guard. I didn't know what to say, but it was deeply troubling, or however you want to handle it. But that's another thing that sometimes we can do, sometimes we can't do.
And another thing that I'm thinking with my situation that I've been taking from what people have been saying today is we can't do it alone. So it's not like I haven't talked to anybody about the situation, but I don't have a support group that's specifically around this stuff. And I'm thinking that would be a really good idea because I can mention it or whatever, but it doesn't mean I take the next step and actually do it.
Right.
So I'm really appreciating the some of the aspects of what is in the book and what you're talking about.
Well, I've long felt that besides bystander, upstander, we need to have a workshop on how do you deal with comments that people make like this. How do you use humor? Some people are great about using humor and getting the point across that it's not okay with them. But we need people to come up with ideas and have trainings that are like bystander, upstander for these kind of situations.
Yeah.
Now, I don't have all the answers, that's for sure, but
Cameron has her hand up.
okay.
Hi, Nadia, and everyone. It was actually something that Sarah kind of just said, but I think something that happened for me growing up was the feeling of I have to be brave by myself. And so so much of, I think, what I need in order to be more effective or take on what I'm wanting to take on is so much about pulling people together. And I appreciate the way you've emphasized that also in the stories that you've told. Courage, but so much about together, doing this together and creating the support for each other.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And one other thing is that we also need to make ourselves vulnerable when we do this work. So when I started telling my story, most of the time people could relate to it. But of course, 850 people say you're great. One person says you're not great. What do you remember? Right? The one person. So I remember this one student going, I can't believe you teach self-defense. How could you possibly teach self-defense and just stand there and let him do that to you? And I felt like, well, that's what makes me a good self-defense teacher. And it isn't like I flip a switch and now I got it all together. I don't have it all together. I have it way more together than I did, lots more, but it's a work in progress. Anything else?
Nadia, thank you so much. This has been wonderful, eye-opening in so many ways, and hopefully the start of all sorts of things to come from it.
I hope so. That's my dream. I sure hope so. So, again, I just want to mention that Lauren has a podcast, or she's on a podcast, and it's, is there a chat? Is there a way to write it? And of course, everyone's going to leave and you won't see the chat. Um, it's a podcast called The Empowerment Podcast, and Lauren was on it. The Empowerment Project.podbean.com. And she did a couple of extra.
Say that again.
Oh, the Empowerment Project dot podbean BEAN.com. And if you go there, you'll see that there was an interview with Lauren, and she did a couple of exercises from the book with her, and she just has a somewhat different take on things, but it's great. You just kind of get a flavor of the two of us. Well, it's my honor doing this work. I feel so pleased that you came. I was so disappointed with the ice storm. Um, and so I'm grateful that we got to do it this way. And I'm grateful that we got to do it with me just basically showing the video, because I don't think I would have had the energy to actually do it. So thanks.
Doing it.
Thank you, Nadia.
Thank
And-
you, Nadia.
And if you like the book, or even if you don't, please put something up on Amazon. We have so few ways to tell people about this book. And one thing that I learned after thinking, oh, I'm working with a real mean publishing house, they don't do the marketing for you. It's up to you.
But we can do it.
And there's even, websites on how do you get more people to put reviews on Amazon. And, I don't have the energy at this point to be looking at those. But so any way that you can think of to tell people about the book. And also, again, we're hoping that we'll set something up where they can be sent to imprisoned, incarcerated people, or put in little neighborhood libraries.
Yeah,
Or
I like
anywhere
that
else.
idea a lot. If you know where your neighborhood libraries are, if you have 1, 2, or 3 of them, get the book and put them in there. I think
Yeah.
that's a really
Great
smart,
idea.
easy
Yeah.
way to go.
Yeah. One thing that we heard is a lot of libraries don't like to carry the book because it's a workbook and it means people write in it. And they don't like to carry things like that. So I don't know that that's true of our library. I know the Multnomah library has it, so I know some will do it. Yeah. Thank you all.
Thank you, Nad.
Nadia.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Thank you so
Sabina
much,
has put
Nadia.
everything in the chat for us. So before we leave the meeting, do look in the chat.
Oh, great. Thank you, Sabina. That's great.
Thank you, Nadia.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you all for joining us. It's been a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Phyllis.
Thank you.
Phyllis, thank you, Judy. Thank you, Nadia, so much. You've changed my life and you've changed so many. Thank you. I hope it comes back to you too.
Oh, it has come back. And I want to thank Judy and Phyllis for making this happen. So, yeah, thank you.
So good to see you, Nadia. It's great to have
All
this.
right.
What a
Well,
treat.
We'll
Nice to see
sign
you.
off. Thank you all for joining us tonight. It's just been wonderful.
you.
Bye-bye.
Night.
Night.